So I really struggled to come up with a title for this talk. And this question went round in my mind many times, and I was trying to reconcile it with my work. So there were many iterations. And one of the first that I had was, what if a building was a city? And this refers to a long-term project I've been doing about a building in Johannesburg. Another option was, what if hell is in your head? And this is about a version of Dante's Inferno that I made. What if there is no rest of the world? This is the strapline from Colours, and would talk about how Colours has had to evolve over the past 23 years. And the truth is, I'm going to talk about all of these things. And I was trying to think about how they fitted together. And really the thing that binds them is the way that I've looked at them and thought about them. And I'm going to try and share with you today my working process, which is very much about looking and thinking. In order to do this, I need to go back. I was born in England in 1981, and I struggled a lot at school. I did very badly academically. I was actually put back a year at school, and shortly after I was statemented as dyslexic. This is the result of a test. And you can see the result showed I had the reading age of a 7-year-old. And I was 17 at the time. I had finished school. So it's a surprise to me in many ways that a large part of my work is the relationship between words and images. And it's really that translation that takes place of how something that exists in the realm of words can become images. And this is particularly kind of brought into focus when making a magazine, because when you strip it down to its essential components, it's the relationship between images and words. And when we read something, or we hear someone speak, it's clear there is a thought behind what is being said. But sometimes when we look at an image, this is particularly true of photography, we can sometimes forget that there's a thought behind the image. I think it's because it's close to a sense. When we see an image of a tree or a house, we just think tree or house. And what I try to do in large part in my work is articulate a thought clearly within an image. And images have a shifting meaning. They can change very easily. And this can happen in various different ways. It can happen by comparison. Simply by juxtaposing two images, we might understand the nature and theatre of political PR within image making. It can happen through subversion. This is a Soviet monument in Bulgaria. And it can happen through recontextualization. This photo was found on the floor of an abandoned apartment. In fact, this room behind. And by identifying the exact place where the picture had been taken many years before, we see the passing of time and a memory of the space. And this building is a building in Johannesburg, which is the first project that I'm going to be talking about today. It's called Ponte City. When it was built, it was the tallest residential building in the Southern Hemisphere. And myself and my collaborator, the South African artist Mikkel Sobotsky, have spent a lot of time in this building over the past 7 years. Now, Ponte City was built in 1976, which was in the middle of the apartheid era, so it was a white-only building. And 1976 is even more significant because it was the same year as the Soweto uprisings, where people started resisting against the ideology of apartheid. And after the end of apartheid, there was a white exodus from the center of Johannesburg. And Ponte City and many other buildings in the area were squatted. And many myths and stories grew up around this building. And it became a symbol for the wider situation within the country. And we wanted to understand this space and how it existed in the imagination of many people. And there was also a plan in 2007 to redevelop the building for a new utopia. So it had gone from utopia to dystopia and was now going to be redeveloped for a new multicultural South Africa. And we began the project in the lifts. And we used the lifts as a photo studio. And it was really how we got to know the residents of the building. And we would simply spend all day going up and down in the lifts. And when someone would allow us to take their picture, we would get their flat number and we would give them a print. And that was our kind of entry point into the lives of the people who live there. Another aspect to the work involved taking a picture out of every window in the entire building, which took many years to do. And I had read this quote from Le Corbusier where he talks about the absent spaces being what defines a building. So here you see an internal view of people's lives and how it relates to the city, how they live spatially in relationship to each other because it's architecturally true to the form, and it's also an unfolding of the space because it's a circular building. And during this process we realized that lots of the stories that we had seen around the building and all of these myths of Nigerian drug lords living in the penthouse suites and prostitution rings weren't really in the people's lives, but we did see them on the televisions. So they were the second in the typology series. And then the third was every door, and we did this in the evening and at night. And you get this kind of stratering where you can see different doors from different periods of the history of the building, from the 1976 apartheid era to the new development. And these are these 4-meter high light boxes, which is how it's shown, and you can see the entire building from top to bottom. There's a more traditional photo documentary element to it. This is the internal structure. It has a hollow core, which is mixed with various parts of archival material. This is from the 2007 development that actually collapsed due to, in some ways, the impossibility of the redevelopment and the financial crisis. It never actually happened, but they started moving out and all the residents in the bottom half of the building and just throwing all of the content of the building into the core. And so we were trying to document the lives of the people within the space and understand how people lived within the building, but we found we kind of hit a wall. So the archival and found material became very important to the project to show the history of the place and how it had changed over time. So it was really out of a frustration of the traditional documentary form that this came about. And we would find elements and fragments in the abandoned apartments after people had been evicted. And this is this series where we would re-identify where the person had been before. You know, this is a moment that we could have never witnessed because it happened in the history of the building. And it's recently been published as a book, which actually consists of 17 other books. And we asked a writer called Ivan Vadislavich, who is a brilliant writer who writes about Johannesburg, to edit the texts. And they have social histories, fictions, and things that even contradict each other and show the complexity of the way in which the building is perceived. And within the purely image-based book, you place these smaller books over the top and you know where to read them. So it's like a key to understanding where to read them. It's also touring as an exhibition at the moment in Europe. And I've just come from Johannesburg and we just did a pop-up exhibition within the building itself. The next project I'm going to talk about was a commission from the Italian publishing house Mondadori to do a version of Dante's Inferno, which was pretty daunting. Dante's Inferno is a 13th century epic poem, and it's the story of a journey through hell, and it's one part of a much larger story, which is called the Divine Comedy, of going through hell and through purgatory and into paradise. And the amazing thing about Dante's Inferno is it has a complete architecture. You can actually model the whole thing just from the poem. And the other aspect to it is psychological. And when we refer to going on a downward spiral in the English language, we're unknowingly referring to a Dantean idea of hell. And really, it's a book of books. It's the aggregation of Greek mythology and philosophy, Roman mythology, etc. And the great artists of history have depicted it, from Botticelli to Gustave Doré. And they're amazing. You know, they're almost unsurpassable. But one thing that they do is they depict the scene on the whole, almost like a theatre set. So opposed to doing that, I thought that I would focus on the macro elements and the details, almost more like a natural historian would, going with Darwin on the Beagle and picking out particular elements. And it was called Hell and Natural History. And I asked my friend to get involved with me, Walter Hutton, who wrote the notation for the drawings. And Walter would read the book out loud to me, and we would stop at various points and discuss bits. I would sit and draw something very quickly and do a sketch like this as we pass through the text, and then at a later date I would draw it up in a more plate-like fashion. And it really tried to combine the psychological element with this anatomical approach and make it seem like a very physical and real place. Do you think this is Judas, who is in the very heart of hell, and it's kind of a step removed from the text. It does this in other ways by showing the family tree behind the character that you see and deconstructing passages which are quite difficult to understand. It also works as a bestiary of the different animals and creatures that you come across. And the other thing about the Inferno is every character has an allegorical interpretation, and there's a subtext, and they often were symbolic of different ideologies. There was a hidden layer. And Dante also put within hell the politicians and corrupt people within the church of the time. This character actually is in hell for dividing Italy and destroying the country. So there's an overview of a couple of projects that in very different way have informed quite deeply the direction that I moved Colours in. I'm just going to give a very short history of the magazine. Colours began 23 years ago when Benetton's photographer of the time, Oliviero Toscani, asked a designer named Tibor Kalman to make a new kind of magazine. And it was based on a very simple but powerful premise, that in this new globalized age they saw around them, that diversity was a good thing. And it was really a celebration of global culture. A good example of this is issue number 4, which was the race issue. And it used this very bold, simple, comparative language. It was also very playful. I actually remember seeing this image on the 6 o'clock news as a kid. It was kind of before people really knew Photoshop. And it took on the big issues of the day. This is a great issue. It was the AIDS issue that confronted people with the issue, and it quite simply and powerfully showed something like how the disease could spread. And it took on large elemental themes, like religion, wealth, multiculturalism. So in 2011, when I first got the opportunity to direct the magazine, I had its past in my head. Now the central premise that Colours is based on is even more true than it was 23 years ago. The world is even more interconnected and globalized. And the question that I had was, is globalization just a good thing? We're told that a website designed in the Middle East influences people in England setting off a bomb. A mortgage that you get on your house in England is contributing to a bank in Greece defaulting on its debt. A car that you drive in Bangkok contributes to the ice melting in the Arctic. The world seems vastly beyond our control to understand, let alone affect. And I didn't want to just show people the world. I wanted to make a guide, a survival guide, for surviving a more complex world. And there's certain things a survival guide does. It's a form of language which puts you in the heart of the story. And it also, that vernacular, using the survival guide form, allows you to do certain things like have a layer of reading that goes over the image. Allows you to show things in a step-by-step fashion. Another aspect that was very important for me was to think about it in a slightly more long-term fashion. So think about something that could be seen as a body of work across many issues and had a consistency, but was also always evolving. And the first of these issues was a survival guide to transport. So, why transport? 90% of the way we move is based on a finite resource. And at the time, I had been reading a lot about peak oil and the idea that this finite resource could come to an end. And that was really the key for me in coming up with an approach to the subject. And it would look at this idea of a post-industrial future in the now and look at people, often by virtue of circumstance, who are making their own forms of transport and already living that reality in some way. And maybe they can teach us something. So, I'll just take you through a couple of the stories. And it begins with a quote from Henry Ford. Most people spend more time and energy going around problems than trying to solve them. How to build the next century. This is a plastic bottle. 1,500 of these are thrown away every second in the United States alone. This one was found on a beach in Kenya by Mansour. And he did something with it. He built a boat from all of the leftover bottles and bits of debris that he found on the beach. He lives in it. He calls it the Century. And of course we show you how you can build your own. This is both showing you how to do something, but it's also a form of storytelling. How to pick up arms against Gaddafi. This is an improvised control box. Now each button on this control box fires 2 missiles. You'll find it in the front of a truck like this one. This is Abdul, a farmer, and I thought it was important to talk about an oil-producing nation, and I had noticed these in the background of the CNN reports. And I suppose it's this step away from the normal form of news making and actually looking at how a simple piece of vernacular design can be a way into a subject. And of course we show you how you can build one yourself. And it tells the backstory of where these weapons have come from in terms of their legacy from the Cold War, etc. How to burn fat fast. These are chips from a deep fat fryer in the UK. Now the average chip shop in the UK produces about 20 litres of waste cooking fat. Buzz Fisher from Wales has made a car that uses that fat, and he uses it as fuel, and he goes around the country campaigning. You can use chip fat as fuel, you can even use human fat. There's a plastic surgeon in the States who created what he called lipodiesel from the excess fat from his patients. You can use coffee, you can use marijuana, you can even use shit. Shit is an incredible resource. You can get methane gas from shit. And it's also the next issue in the Survival Guide series. So why shit? More children die from diarrhea, a banal stomach bug for anyone who has access to a flushable toilet, than die from HIV/AIDS, the measles, and tuberculosis combined. That's 4,000 children a day, and we don't really have a language for it. NGOs talk about water issues and sanitation, and people avoid the subject in many ways. And a lot of this research comes from a book called The Big Necessity, from actually someone who used to be a researcher at Colours. And it was about actually thinking how this research could be brought to life through documenting and finding stories. She's called Rose George. And it shows things like how disease spreads. This is called the F diagram, that shows how feces moves from fingers to food very easily when you don't have access to a flushable toilet. In fact, when you don't, on average, you ingest 20 grams of shit a day. But shit can also save lives. This is a feces sample from an anonymous donor in New York, and it's going to be used in a process called fecal transplant, where one person's shit is actually put in someone else, and it's a very simple procedure, but it can literally save people's lives by rebuilding the flora in the gut. And of course we show you how you can do it yourself. Be careful trying this one at home. Emergency. This is a plastic garden chair. After the earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand, one like this was used to make a toilet, and the sewage infrastructure had completely broken down. So the local residents start having a competition to build their own DIY toilets. And of course, we show you how to build one yourself. So from shit to happiness. Happiness was the next issue in the series. Now, happiness was a much more difficult subject than transport and shit. It's not tangible. It's even difficult to really define what happiness is. So in order to try and give it a bit more tangibility, I decided that we would look at it from a psychological and neurological perspective and really look at the idea of happiness being what happens in your head, and looking at the new science of happiness. So it uses stories like this one about a church in Florida where people pray through laughter as jumping off points to looking at what's happening inside your head, how endorphins are released, other ways that you can get endorphins by scratching or eating the right food, how to choose your therapist. This is Morisco. He's a llama, but he's also a therapist. And he's used in a form of therapy called animal therapy. Animals can be very therapeutic, and it turns out that just touching an animal lowers the blood pressure in the person and within the animal itself. And we recommend various other therapists for you as well. So from happiness to the end of the world. Apocalypse was the next issue in the series. And this was really designed to coincide with the Mayan calendar's predictions of the end of the world. And opposed to talking about the Mayan predictions, it was using this as an opportunity to look at what climatologists are saying. So this is the cover where each quadrant relates to a different form of anthropogenic climate change. And what we did is identified different conditions and habitats that climatologists are saying the world will end up like, but places that exist in the world now, and we went to them to see how people coped. This is in Montserrat after tectonic shifts and a volcano, and we talked to people who are surviving within that situation. And it's really the most survivally of the survival guides. This is Beijing during a process of desertification. There's an estimated 1 million tons of Gobi Desert that blows into Beijing. Probably Dan is sucking it up. I don't know, but I think it must contribute. And we teach you how to cope in these situations, like how to breathe and what to grow in arid land, how to cook. And we also talk to a series of survivalist specialists like Doug Hoffman, who teaches us how to hide. So from the end of the world to the market. The market was the next issue in the series, and there was an evolution here for me, because this issue is based on a very simple definition of a market as being a network of trade. And the magazine actually works in a completely interlinked narrative form, where we would go to different local markets and look at how they link to each other and use these local markets to describe different economic principles. And the origin of this idea came from an essay called I Pencil, which quite beautifully illustrates the complexity of the market just through saying no one person could make a pencil, and it elaborates. It's actually written with the pencil in first person, so it goes to the tree, to the chainsaw, to the steel, to the man who had to use it, to the paint, to the graphite, to the mine in China, and it explodes out, and this huge complexity comes out of a pencil very quickly. And it begins with this satellite image. And this satellite technology was developed during the Cold War to spy on the Soviet Union. And now that same technology is used by stock market analysts to look at crop yields. This is the Mercantile Stock Exchange. The Mercantile used to have 10,000 open outcry traders. Today, there only 1,000 remain, because computer automated algorithms carry out 70% of trade. And from this we go to one computer. And I always find it amazing that there's this abstract rendering of reality, which is the market, that you kind of detach from real world events. So these are actually the markets responding to particular events, like the lunar cycle has a big effect on the market, a politician resigning, or the death of Osama bin Laden, trying to connect those two things. And from this one computer, we go to where one like this will end up. This one was found in Alaba Market, just in Nigeria. And in Alaba Market, it has a second economic cycle, because people like Julius fix these computers and resell them. And this article looks at notions around planned obsolescence, and in a market economy, how things are made to break. And it carries on in this interlinking form. The next issue looked at the nature of news and tried to take a step back from the news-making process, and looked at how news-making has changed due to the advent of new technologies and also inherent human bias. There's this expression we have in English called the news machine, and it was really looking at how also the news can feed on itself. And it begins with a randomly selected page of the Daily Mail newspaper, where all articles that derive from press releases have been removed. And this has always been part of how we've made news. It's just exponentially become more so. 60% of articles in the UK are wholly or mainly derived from press releases or wire copy. And that since 2000, the newspaper industry has nearly shrunk by half. So what you have is a compound problem that's created because there's all these new channels of technology where you have less people expected to do more in the same amount of time. And you're bound to have a problem there. These pictures were taken in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And the Philadelphia Inquirer used to have foreign bureaus across the world. Today they have none. These pictures are from Waziristan in Pakistan, where no foreign journalist is allowed. And Waziristan in Pakistan at the time was the place where most drone strikes were happening, and no one was reporting this. And these pictures were taken by a guy called Noor Biram, who's one of the few people who's documenting these drone strikes. He was a fixer, and now he simply hears it on the radio when a drone strike is happening, drives to the place and tries to document what's going on. And often the body is blown into pieces, so it's impossible to actually identify. So they have to rummage through and look for ID cards to verify who's actually been killed. And then in these internal pages, which reflect this idea of going behind the news story, we get also these comics which take us through a day in the working life of our different people who are plugging this gap within news making. This is an app called Dronestagram by a guy called James Bridle, and it gives the GPS coordinates of where a drone strike is happening and sends it to your phone. Another way of reporting on the unreportable. Drone technology is also used by paparazzi though. This one was used to take pictures of Paris Hilton on the French Riviera. This is the picture of the capture of Gaddafi. Now this picture is actually a picture of a picture. The decisive moment was actually taken by one of the rebels and then retaken by a photographer off the back of his phone. So the idea of the decisive moment has changed. And this picture of a picture was the image which disseminated across the world. So from the news world to the art world. The next issue looks at art and just tries to ask some very simple and fundamental questions like, what is art?
What is art? Hey, this one is very difficult for understand.
Arte è tutto, è l'infinito.
What is art?
Futuring.
Art is what makes you feel good.
Wat is kunst? Ja, is goed. Mag ik er even over nadenken of moet ik gelijk antwoorden?
What is art?
That's what they give us.
I've been teaching art for 40-something years, and the question has been asked to me. It's very hard to put an answer to it.
C'est compliqué?
Che cos'è l'arte?
Emozione.
I don't know.
Madonna, quanto tempo ha per rispondere?
Art is business, sex and fashion.
It's something I do. I need to do. When I'm here talking to you, I miss it.
Art is finished. It's free when it's good. When it's costs a lot of money, most likely not good anymore.
Art is a representation of how a person views the world.
Qu'est-ce que c'est l'art?
Nothing particular.
L'arte è tutto. L'arte è tutto. Ben, l'art, c'est ce qui montre ce qu'on ne peut pas voir, parfois.
Art is something that is useless, but it helps sensible beings to have a better life, probably.
It's wonderful, the only thing worth living for. Okay?
And this is the cover. And you decide what you deem fit to go in the gallery. This is a scrap of paper from my desk, which we took to a neon sign maker. And it is not a work of art. It's never been shown in a gallery. It has no economic value. This is a work of art. It has a value of over 100,000 euros. And it really looks at this art, not art dichotomy and asks some fundamental questions. Also looking at the moment of transformation. And in the age of the idea, the makers behind the artists. This is Franco Cevietti, who makes works for Jeff Koons, Mark Quinn. He's even done a series of commissions for Saddam Hussein. And this is Vic Hislop, who caught the shark for Damien Hirst. And he was actually putting sharks in formaldehyde in the 70s. And we also look at ideas around conservation and how that's approached within contemporary art. And again, that moment of transformation. This is a Jeff Koons which was dropped. Its value is now declared null. Ai Weiwei drops a pot, a Ming vase, and its value goes up exponentially. So from the art world to the streets, the next issue is protest. And protest really tries to take a step away from where the media is looking and look at a series of external conditions which may have led to the protest and not be reported on during the whole process of the recent uprisings. And it begins in Russia in 2010, when they suffered their worst drought in a century. Russian wheat farmers stopped exporting their crops. Within 6 months, global wheat prices had doubled. Egyptians eat more bread per person than any other people in the world. More than half of the people in the Arab world are under 30. 1 in 4 of them has no job. And when a 26-year-old fruit vendor lost his job and his ability to work after he got his scales confiscated, he set himself on fire, and he was called Mohammed Bouazizi. And this is the moment which has been created as the catalyst for the Arab Spring. And his self-immolation spread across the Arab world. And you have a situation that goes like this to this. And it carries on in this interlinking form, looking at the revolutionary April 6th movement, who got this fist, they used this fist as a symbol. And they got this fist from the revolutionary group Otpor from Serbia. And Otpor got their symbols and signs from a book by an American academic named Gene Sharp. And the book is called From Dictatorship to Democracy. It's actually illegal to own in many parts of the world and teaches different forms of non-violent resistance. And it's in part facsimiled and put within the issue. And this speaks to the other part of this issue, which is a series of strategies that are used within protest. This is a banknote from Iran. Now, YouTube was blocked in Iran after Basij, which are the anti-riot police, shot and killed a protester. It was uploaded onto YouTube. They blocked it. Protesters printed the images that were blocked onto money as another way to disseminate the information. We look at other ways that money can be used as a form of protest. The president of Kenya is paid more than the government, than the German chancellor and the US president combined. And this pig was made by the Occupy Kenya movement, who appropriated various symbols to protest against government greed. They also drew the names of all the politicians on pigs and released them outside Parliament. We look at other ways that the police control riots. These are from South Korea. This is an anti-riot tank from the Israeli government. The Israelis use blue dye to mark protesters. This was taken in Berlin. And protesters in Berlin have used the film Avatar as a reference point in order to protest against the occupation. We look at other ways that they protest in Berlin. One of the things they do is they write messages on reverse on mirrors, so when all the press corps are there, they can reflect them onto the soldiers, and these different messages actually come out within the pictures. The next issue is about moving house, and it's really an atlas of human migration. And it begins with the fact that if you go far enough back, we are all the descendants of migrants. And when your ancestors walked out of Africa, there were no borders. On the left-hand page, you can see how many countries existed in 1914. On the right, you can see how many exist today. The amount of countries that exist have doubled. So if we define migration as crossing borders, that's bound to change the way we perceive it. And it begins with a more contemporary migration from Africa. And this is the crossing from Africa into Lampedusa in Italy. And within these pages, you unfold them to get these atlases which show different migratory routes within the continent and from outside. And the next issue is probably the most globalizing force of all, football. And it was designed to coincide with the World Cup and takes the structure of the World Cup to come up with an alternative 32 teams that look at various issues, from gender issues to nationalism to new technologies.
32 teams, one gold trophy, the most beautiful game on earth.
In Colors 90 Football, featuring Sunday Amateurs, a secret Saudi club, a team of 2,300 players learning to play like Real Madrid. Scorpion kicks, bicycle kicks, and a kick in the balls. Thierry Henry taking a break after scoring a goal. And this man breaking his neck after scoring a goal. A player in a balaclava and a pack of stickers, even a shiny one. Cristiano Ronaldo, Balotelli, and someone with a haircut like Neymar's. A blind striker, a team with guns, a team without guns, a team with arthritis, a team without legs, priests, albinos, grannies, lesbians, Tibetans, and robots. A field with three sides, a field with skewed sides, and a field with a hole in the middle. Commentator, screaming, praying, crying, and a city in Iran where everything is about Brazil, including the falafels. Colors 90, football, out now.
So there's a very quick run through of the way that I reach a subject and an overview of the recent issues. So I'm now going to talk very quickly about my approach. Visualizing the issue. There's often a tension between wanting to speak to the issue and finding a great story that doesn't work in image form. And it needs to do both. It needs to work in this quite seemingly superficial level as pictures, but also have real content there. We use a formal language so we can objectify. Continuity is very important. This picture was taken in the studio in colors. This one was taken in Alaba market, just outside Nigeria, on a dump. And all of these pictures were taken by different photographers in different countries. And I think one of the things that creates power within the magazine is actually denying lots of individuals the ability to have a style. So there is a strong, coherent visual language. We use the typological method, so you can see the similarities between things, but also the differences. What I call thingness, which I suppose is how things can say something more potently than the classic reportage image we see on the news. This banknote is from the Congo, and after Mobutu was overthrown, they couldn't afford to reprint the currency, so they simply hole-punched Mobutu's face out of it. Inefficiency. There's a huge amount of kind of exhaustive process. This is a tiny part of it that goes into even just making one page. And I'm a strong believer that you learn from all of these iterations and they go into something as simple as a one-page layout. We deconstruct things down to their component parts. We show how things work, literally say how something moves around the body. We show process, try and give another angle. These are the the tunnels from Egypt into Gaza. And of course, as we're a guide, we explain how to. And underlying all of this work is a celebration of human ingenuity and looks at people who maybe wouldn't be at a conference like this, but can still teach us something through the way they live and approach their lives. It's also important to build around the issue. At core, it's a magazine, but there also has to be a world that exists around it. It comes from like retranslating the cover, like this, into signs which are at the Design Museum in London, or reverse engineering, this idea of the news machine. We worked with the programmers at Fabrica to make a machine that you could tweet to that actually embodied this idea.
I am the news machine. Tweet on me at Colors Machine. My megaphone will read your news out loud. Half of all news stories published in Switzerland, Italy, and the United States contain factual errors. The tape recorder listens, converting what it hears into text, so that the television can show it on screen. The camera watching the television converts what it sees into a signal to the radio antenna, which broadcasts the tweet. Half of all the new stories published in Swaziland, Sicily, and the Nut States contain feudal errors. A waiting microphone interprets the radio address as text again, and then I'll print it. Compare the original tweet with my final report. Accuracy of reproduction varies according to the clarity of your writing and to chance.
And the machine takes a live feed from different wire agencies as well. So we live in a new era, a digital era, but I still very much believe in print for colours. I think that many forms of media will disappear due to this feed-like way that we consume information. And this will be quick information that responds to what's happening now. But I think more slow forms of journalism still are justified in print. But if we're going to print things, we have to embody the ideas that we're engaging with and actually reflect them in what we make. The other thing is making it is a collective process. I'm going to try and talk you through even something like this cover in reverse. So Fang Chao has finished the final drawing. I'm arguing with Jonah and Cosimo and Caitlin about the text, the title. Not really happy with the sausage or the pig. It gets redrawn. Tim and Ramon are playing with colours. This is just a small sample of the colours. Pig still being redrawn, still doesn't feel right. An earlier version, which is much lighter, doesn't really seem like it's got the weight of the thing. This seems a bit rough. Felipe is sampling all of the reference images, which is being taken from the research. And here you've just got a page of my sketchbook. And I'm going to finish by showing you part of the test that I was telling you that I took when I was 17 at the beginning. You have to show it on screen. It's called the Object Assembly Test. And you get these shapes and you have to construct them. You're not told what. And the answer is a hand. It has a singular answer, this test. And 5 years after taking it, I reflected on it and I reconstructed it from memory and asked various people that I tested it on to reinterpret the test. And I think many of the things that we take for granted of having a singular answer can be seen and thought about in many different ways beyond what we each individually may think. Thank you.
So how do you choose your topics and issues, like which one should be next?
Well, I think it's about finding something that in some ways speaks to larger themes that are happening in the world. And that's the, I suppose, more theoretical part. And then there's the more hands-on part where you need to be able to see how that's going to work as images. And it's a combination of both of those things. And I have a very long list, a wish list.
Right.
And we discuss them, and it depends on various, different things that are happening in the world. But it's not really responding to current affairs.
But do you actually plan them out for like the whole year, 2 years?
It's a very rough plan.
Rough. Let's try.
Yeah.
Hi. With the stories so diverse, how do you pick a team to go and research for it?
There's a team of about 8 people, which are the core team, which is a very diverse team of people from all around the world, but we're all in a place together. And it really depends on the issue. There's a big informal network of colours of people who have passed through, and some involve going and taking a lot of pictures, and other issues are much more about looking through archives, like the news issue, which is more looking at the way we look at pictures. So it's a combination of things. It depends on the issue. But there is a core team.
So the question is, as far as producing content, do you actually consider your audience, or do you actually just kind of whatever I feel?
I mean, I always say to people that there isn't a demographic.
Right.
And I think if you go too far down the line of thinking about the audience, you don't stay true to looking at an idea.
Right.
And I think you're more likely to speak to your audience if you actually genuinely pursue looking at the ideas. So it's not done on a conscious level, but it probably is a reflection in a way of the interests of who makes it on some level, you know, but it's not like market research or anything like that.
So you don't actually worry too much about...
Well, I think that you want something that people connect to and resonates, but it's not like done in a commercial sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you create identity in every magazine to keep it consistent throughout, like, the different magazines, like different issues, sorry?
Well, I think it's about having a series of component parts and a method to the way you do things, and there's always a tension between creating something that has an identity and has a coherency and you see the voice of the thing, and then doing something which is a conceptually unique and engaging with the subject. And I think you need a piece of thinking that unlocks the way you approach each subject. So it's both of those things.
You kind of have to balance it.
Yeah, and I suppose I was very conscious that I felt like the magazine had jumped around a lot, and I wanted to create something that could be seen as a very consistent body of work. There's something I leave out of the story that I tell about colours, which is that I actually made an issue in 2007. I kind of cheekily pitched an idea when I was at Fabrica at the time, and it's the one time that there was a theme that was set. Al Gore was coming to do his environmental speech, so it had to be on sustainability. And I debated showing it today. In fact, I put it at the end because I think it talks about the theme. I'm just going to very quickly show something, if you can just go back to the projector. And this really doesn't fit in with any of the others. And I'm just going to go back in time. I've just chucked this on here, so forgive me. And this was the first issue I actually ever made, which was based around the idea of global warming. And I created an island off the coast of Sweden called Vårland, and this was based on research that climatologists had done around this area, around the Baltic Sea. And the issue had to talk about something which really wasn't happening yet in the world. So I decided that we would make a fictional issue of colours. And this place would be a singular place where all of the potential problems that we face and solutions that we have could be on one island, and it would be a guide to this island. And here's the original sketches. It's called Vårland. This is Vårland in 2007 when the issue was made. This is Vårland in 2057 when the issue is set. What will the beaches look like? Where will your kids play? Where will you stay on the island? There's a bed on the island in the hotel where you can get money off the bill by using through the kinetic energy. I should speak to Dan about this, he's probably already done it. What will you eat? People on Vårland are vegetarian due to the fact that it's so carbon intensive to actually eat meat. What will the museums look like? This is the Museum of Extinction. What will the monuments be? This is the monument to the era of petroleum. What will the healthcare be like? There's a policy on the island that every child is offset with a certain amount of different trees to keep up the biodiversity, and a whole series of different problems that they're facing. And then there's a back end to this issue which shows that all of these ideas are real world ideas that are applicable now. So this imagined future is something that could be applied. And it's the only issue where we barely left the building. We never really went more than 20 kilometers from Fabrica where Colours is made, and we built everything ourselves. Anyway, I've just shoehorned that in there. Okay.
Okay. Next question. Have you ever envisioned what Colours magazine would look like in the next 5 or 10 years?
No.
No.
I haven't. No.
You haven't thought
no,
about it?
No, I don't really. That's not how my brain works. I don't think.
Like you
like
said
I mean,
before,
I'm too
I live
busy
in
doing
the
what.
now.
Yeah.
I live in the
I mean,
now.
I don't really. I think you have to think about how media will change, but essentially, what you need is great content.
Yeah.
And you can people get very lost in the form and the idea of new technologies. And really there's many things that have changed, but there's a core to what we make, which is about actually showing people the world. So I guess that kind of answers your question, but goes off on a bit of a tangent.
Okay.
How do you compare your Colours to another magazine?
I mean, the honest answer is I don't really think of it as like making a magazine. I approach it like making a book. So, and I think, if anything, that is its kind of uniqueness, is it doesn't really adhere to the normal rules that a magazine would. It's an in-depth body of research. It's only comes out 4 times a year. But my background isn't from magazines. So, I've never worked in a magazine before. I don't really know how one should be run. So I'm kind of, I'm making it up in some ways as I go along. But I think of books as a stronger reference for me than magazines.
So it's like a bookazine.
Bookazine. Yeah, bookazine is good.
Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Waterhouse.